もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo needs me free.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
Well, I'm on the floor, on my back, wrestling out a big ass muffler, so that must mean I'm working on the exhaust in this episode. Well, that was highly unpleasant. Oh, this thing weighs a ton. Before I actually begin fabbing up the exhaust, I'm taking some time to clean all the stock exhaust heat shields. Mainly because I'm sick of all the undercoating and junk falling into my eyes when I was under the car removing the muffler. As you've seen me use before, kerosene does wonders to remove undercoating, but you know the downside is that it makes a huge flammable mess. To make sure that I mount the muffler correctly, first I'm going to install the rear bumper. I'm going to start by positioning the muffler. I'll just use jack stands to hold it roughly in the correct position, and then do a bunch of adjustment once it's up on the stand in order to get it as close as I can to the final position. I actually hate doing this. It's really fiddly work, and I'm quite often very paranoid about mounting this thing crooked. A beautiful dual tip stainless steel muffler like this one is a lot harder to mount than one of those horrible round rice cannons, because of course if you get it uneven you can instantly tell from behind the car if the tips aren't level. It's not bad actually. I'm making a bunch of these tabs, which I will weld to the exhaust system, including the muffler, to which I will be able to bolt the exhaust hanger brackets. I think about there is where these need to be. Two stainless steel muffler mounts, and you can see that I just welded the bolts to the back so that I'd have a nice stud to bolt something to without having to fiddle with a nut back there. These are my favorite style exhaust hangers because they're flexible enough to isolate the exhaust from the chassis, but stiff enough so that the mufflers don't bounce around at the back of the car. Now they're meant to be clamped to the pipe, so what I do is I cut that part off and then drill a hole to turn it into a flange so that it can be bolted to whatever I'm hanging. These are universal mounts, of course, so they have to be trimmed to fit the application. It looks like I need to cut them down to a total length of, I can barely see that, 10 centimeters. Of course, I need to be able to mount the hanger to the car. So what I did was just cut 1.5 inches of 1-inch angle iron, and then I'll simply drill a hole through which I can bolt the hanger, and then this side will weld to the bottom of the car. And I'll just weld an M8 bolt to it. Now the way this mount works is that this piece welds to the bottom of the car and the mount then bolts to it, and then the muffler bolts to the mount. Okay, just get a quick tack on here. Okay, just pull this muffler off so that I can get access to it and weld that sucker in place. One rear muffler mount welded in place. Can you tell yet that I hate exhausts that rattle around behind the car? Now I'll just put the rear mounts back on the car so that I can mount up the muffler and get the location for the front hanger. Yeah, I kind of cheated and did this one off camera because, to be honest, there's very little space back here. And it's really frustrating to be struggling with all this stuff in no space, with all the junk falling off the car in your eyes, and have to manage the camera at the same bloody time. I'll just make a few marks on the heat shield so that I know where to cut for the rear mount to pass through. One hole. Back under the car now with all 3 mounts made. Notice that each one of these has a slotted hole at the top so that I can adjust the height of the mount, and thus, once the muffler is in place, adjust it for its final position at the back of the car to make sure it's even. Good for now. Okay, so this should now just slide into the rear mount, and then hook into the front mounts. Notice how I used studs on the muffler so that I didn't have to fart around trying to work a nut and a bolt. Instead, I can just hook the muffler on with its studs and it stays in place, not falling onto my head. Almost like I've done this before. Okay, well, with the muffler mounted, it's as I would say to the girlfriend. I'm done at the back, time to move to the front. Since it's rather difficult to film underneath the car due to both the lack of space and light, here's a clear view of the exhaust components before I start building the system. Starting at the turbo, we have a 3-inch stainless steel V-band, then the downpipe, then a 3-inch flex section to a 3-inch catalytic converter, downsizing now to 2.5-inch, to a stainless steel resonator, following through to a stainless steel muffler, and then using these stainless steel tubing bends up and around the rear axle, and finally to the muffler that I just mounted. I'm going to start at the turbo and then work my way back to the muffler at the rear. So the first step is to loosely attach this ATP turbo 3-inch stainless steel V-band. Thankfully, there's a ton of room here to send the downpipe through. So we'll begin by cutting the length between the turbo and the firewall, and it looks like about 5 3/4 inches. All the tubing that I'm using is nice thick wall 0.065 304 stainless. And now I'll just tack the tubing to the V-band. Magnets and clamps hold it in place. I know the next piece has to be 90 degrees, so I might as well just go and tack that now. I have lots of bits of scrap tubing around, which when taped together with some painter's tape make it fairly easy to figure out what I need to cut for my final length. You know, some of it's aluminum, some of it's stainless steel, but since it's just for mock-up, it really doesn't matter what it's made out of. Yeah, that's not bad. I'll just tape that in place. Well, it looks like I just need to add about 1/2 inch to this vertical piece here, and then that should put me in pretty good alignment to go straight down the center of the car at enough distance so that the cat and other stuff isn't banging into the bottom. Okay, so 6 3/4 plus 3/4 is 7 1/2. So just cut this to 7 1/2 and we'll see how it fits. Now the best place for my cat is underneath a pre-existing heat shield at the center of the car. That keeps it far enough away from the hot rotary exhaust that it won't melt, but at least close enough that it will light off fairly quickly and begin functioning probably within less than a minute after startup. So this next 90-degree bend has to position the pipe so that it travels down through this groove, which is in line with the cat. And because I have a little play in the flex joint, it should be fairly easy. I would say right about there. So we'll just mark that. Off the car again for more tack welding. And back in the car again. The next piece is this flex coupling, because of course the engine moves back and forth on its mount during operation, and you don't want to be rattling the whole exhaust. So this gives it some strain relief, which also prevents, cracking. Now the last part to be tacked to this downpipe are these 3-inch 3-bolt flanges. Now if I was to just continue this pipe all the way to the cat, it would be too big to actually remove from the engine bay, so I need to break it with the flanges. The only annoying part about these things is that their inner diameter is a little bit bigger than the pipe itself, so it kind of doesn't anchor itself to the tubing while being welded, so I'll have to carefully make one tack and then adjust the final position by just bending the tack. That was a pain. Downpipe is officially tacked. Well, I'm done underneath the car, contorting myself into the positions of the Kama Sutra for a while, because now that the downpipe is completely tacked, I will bring it up over to the bench to fully weld it before I continue on with the rest of the exhaust. I've already bolted on a second 3-bolt flange to prevent warpage during welding. So on the V-band side, I will just install this temporary V-band that I often use to prevent warping when I'm welding these things. These are actually very easy to warp, so I would highly recommend doing this if you're welding a V-band. And now just the traditional wiping with acetone to clean everything up.
Unlike the turbo manifold, I'm not back purging the exhaust. Even though it's stainless, I'm actually welding at a very low current, about 45 to 50 amps, for very low penetration, so the backside of the weld won't be moltened, and thus there is far less concern of it absorbing oxygen and oxidizing.
That was the last weld. Downpipe is now welded. Cat needs flanges too, you know. Well, the next section of tubing is about as easy as a drunk Lindsay Lohan. Just a piece of straight tubing from the cat to the downpipe, 23 inches long. just before I pull this thing off to weld it, I'm going to mark the location for the oxygen sensor. Okay, bung's tacked, and I'll just put that back on the car to make sure the O2 sensor still fits. Well, looks like the sensor still fits, so we're ready to weld. Okay, well, now that all the welding is done on the mid-pipe, it can get bolted back in the car, and then I can get started on the catback section. And it's kind of weird saying catback this time, because for once, there's an actual cat that I'm going back from. Well, I have been spending the better part of the last hour subtly moving this resonator in various directions so that I can find exactly where it's going to end up. And I think I've found it right here. Now that's one of the keys about building a nice exhaust system, is really thinking about the positioning of your various parts. Because there's nothing worse than seeing an exhaust somebody built where one of the components is hanging down 4 inches below everything else. As it is, I'm going to have to create kind of a zigzag here, but it is what it is. Sometimes the space dictates what you can do. Just like on the downpipe, I'll be using these tubing-sized stainless steel weld Ls to do the bends and curves on the rest of the exhaust. These suckers are incredibly difficult to find if you don't know where to look. Your best bet, if you need them, is to go to an industrial supply company that caters to the food industry. McMaster Car also carries them if you're at a place where that McMaster Car actually ships to. Now what's awesome about these is that even though they come in 90s and 45s, also oddly enough complete round donuts, you can just chuck them in the bandsaw and cut one bend into a whole bunch of different small little bends. And then the part you've cut makes it really easy to get some really nice shapes. Looks as though I'm kind of on the right track with these two bends, but what I'll do is I'll cut a piece to go between them and see where I'm at after that. Before I go any further, I'm going to attach the 3-inch to 2.5-inch reducer to the flange that mates up to the cat. That way there's one less part for me to try to hold up in the air while I'm figuring out how to position these pipes. After I cut various lengths of tubing on the bandsaw, I held it all up and it kind of just fell together. So what I'm looking at is this piece, kind of in there like that, and then I'll trim it for length. And that piece here, this piece here, and then it all kind of lines up. I love it when that happens. So I'll take this over to the bench and tack it together. Now that fits really well, but this piece needs a little bit of trimming. So we'll just do a marker line to give me an idea of where I have to cut. I did a little back and forth fitting and tacking off camera, and it appears that although I trimmed this a little rough here, everything lines up perfectly. So once again, I will make a mark, then bring this over to the bench to be tacked. Okay, back on the car for final fitting and tacking. Time once again for some awesome TIG welding on my back under the car. I think it's not even necessary to say that trying to TIG weld like this is about as awkward as meeting your father in line at the sperm donor clinic. Actually, you know what? It might be more awkward if you're both at the sperm donor clinic and you have to use the room after him. So I was just about to weld all these joints, and then it struck me how artful this whole assembly looks standing up as it is. Yes. Obviously, it is a postmodern representation of a neo-humanistic paradigm demonstrated through stark mechanical simplicity. Also, it would make a really good lamp if you put a light bulb right there. Welded. Fully welded. So time to go back on the car. And yes, there's a whole other muffler on the back of this resonator. I just did that off camera because it was quite literally the exact same steps and the exact same set of bends to put that muffler on as to put the resonator on. As the final rear section of the exhaust goes above the axle, it has to be as close to the body as possible so as the axle moves up on the suspension travel, they both don't collide. So it looks like I'm taking a hard 90 right off of the muffler, then following that up with another 90 to point the exhaust towards the rear of the car. Just a few quick tacks to hold the first 90-degree section in place off the back of the muffler. A little over an inch of straight tubing is the exact length to put this 90 degree exactly where I want it. So what I'll do is line that up and then mark it so I can tack weld it together on the bench. Okay, put this back on the car and continue plumbing. Well, okay, we're on the home stretch now, and I think that it's going to be reasonably straightforward. So that looks pretty good there and brings me fairly close. Here's a little section of one of those 90 degrees I've cut, which it's starting to match up. Nope. Again, having all kinds of scraps of tubing helps a lot. Okay. I think I'm in the right direction there. Just go to a 45. Ooh. Getting closer. I think if we maybe add an inch to the part that goes over the axle, and then grab my, yep, that looks like it right there. Let's see if I can hold all this. Nope. But I think a little bit of length on this tailpipe. It slips into the muffler, so I have some play in and out. Grab that spacer. There. There, and look at that. A little bit of adjustment, and that's it right there. So I'm going to start tacking some of this together on the bench. Okay, well that's not bad. Now, this little bit of misalignment right here is okay, because that slack is easily taken up by the flanges. So I'll just make some alignment marks on this side. Of course, if I was building a muscle car, I wouldn't be tacking this together because the exhaust would end right here, just at the center line of the rear axle. I have no idea why they do that, but they always do. To me, it just seems like it's making the car excessively loud for no reason and sending fumes into the cabin. And after tacking, back under the car again to make sure she still fits. Getting really close to being finished, And I do have to admit that I have spent a lot of time building this exhaust. And there's a point at which it ceases to be an exhaust and instead becomes some kind of wonderful stainless steel functional sculpture. And yeah, I could have just went down to the local muffler shop and had the part-time employees bend me up something out of crushed bent aluminized steel tubing, but no, that's just not right. That would be like me going to the bar at 3 a.m. and just taking home whatever woman is available. Yeah, I mean, it would work for the time being, but in the morning, once I took a good look at it, just as once my friends took a good look under the car and saw what was under there, I don't think I'd be remotely happy with the results. These are the last two joints to be welded, the rear flange and the muffler. Every part of this exhaust has been on and off this car at least 10 bloody times. So it's pretty satisfying that I'm finally bolting the muffler on for the last time. Now you may or may not be able to tell, but every time I bolt one of these exhaust pieces on, I'm leaving things just a little bit loose and tightening it up one nut and bolt at a time while constantly checking fit. That's pretty much standard operating procedure when dealing with any exhaust system, since there's so much slack and movement in the pipes and flanges. If you just try to crank everything down, you'll never make it fit. These are hand fabricated parts, of course, so everything moves just a little bit while welding and a little bit as it's installed and removed from the car.
How's it fitting?
Oh, it's fitting very well. I'm actually really surprised at how well it's fitting.
I'm not.
I am. Well, stainless moves so much that, you know, it's hard to keep everything straight, but these flanges just lined up absolutely perfectly. Yeah. Well, the exhaust system is not quite done yet. It needs to be supported with some hangers. I've already installed one on the mid pipe, so I think next I need to support this section here. As limited as I am for space, it looks like I'll be installing the hanger right here. Now I just have to make a mount to attach it to the body. Not bad. Whew. Tacked. I have a few more of those to do, but since it's mostly just more of the same, I think right here is a good place to stop. So, I guess this means it's the end of episode 26. Next up, I don't know, maybe cooling system?